Hello, my name is Antonio Vasquez.
And I'm Sergio Perez. For our video project, we decided to talk about these three muscles, the flexor carpi radialis, the flexor carpi ulnaris, and the palmaris longus muscle.
The flexor carpi ulnaris muscle, its origin and insertion points. So, the flexor carpi ulnaris muscle originates and it's located on the medial epicyle of the humerus, posterior aspect of the proximal ulna, and it inserts in the pisiform hamate and base of the fifth metacarpal, being some actions of the flexor carpi ulnaris muscle, being some of the main ones being that flexion of the wrist and abduction of the wrist. So other actions that this muscle also assists in, but it is not its primary actions, would include weak flexion of the elbow, flexion of the wrist. If you were to be in anatomical position, you would see it in the sagittal plane, the flexion of the wrist going towards your forearms or up. And for abduction of the wrist, if you were to see it in the frontal plane, you would see it in abduction or going to the sides towards your body. Some movements that the flexor carpi ulnaris is seen in daily use would be carrying grocery bags, using your phones, writing or typing, pushing on the surface, or even sweeping. We see these because when flexion, like example, writing or typing, you tend to put your hands and flex the wrist to type or elevate it from your desktop or whatever, creating flexion in the wrist. Some exercises that can be used to increase strength for the flexor carpi ulnaris can be palm up wrist curls, whereas you can see right here, having the back or posterior end of your forearm on a flat surface, leaving the wrist on the edge and bringing it all the way up in the flexed position and bringing it back down. Another exercise you can do is cable palm up wrist curls. Standing up, having a cable pull resistance, pulling your wrist back and activating the flexicarpal ulnaris to pull it back forward or create in a flex position. Some um, Some stretch exercise for the flexor carpi ulnaris include a full having your elbow fully extended and the forearm sublimated, as we can see right here. And you're gonna just passively extend and abduct the wrist, pulling it back. Another exercise that we can do is going on all fours, having the palm of your hands on the ground, having your wrist sublimated, having the forearms facing away, and then you're going to slightly sit back or lean back, getting a nice stretch or extension in that forearm. Some ways to progress and regress these exercise. First off, to progress for strengthening or just creating more muscle, increasing the difficulty, you can start off by increasing the weight, adding more reps, or even adding more sets. Some ways to regress the strengthening portion for these exercises, just decreasing the amount of reps, decreasing the amount of sets, or even using bands instead of weights. Or you can have someone apply resistance as you're pulling, so it can be adjusted to your need. Some ways to progress the stretching portion of this could be increasing the time you hold that stretch for, or even just increasing the distance by pulling the hand farther back. Some ways we can regress from the stretching is just decreasing the distance, so not pulling as far back, but still applying some form of extension. Another way is just decrease the amount of time you can hold it for. So instead of holding it for 30-second duration, start off with a 15 seconds and then so on and so on. Some possible injuries you can get from this muscle is flexor carpi ulnaris tendonitis, where you have overuse of the muscle. Sorry about that. Overuse of the muscle, creating inflammation in the wrist. Another thing you can Uh, Another injury that can be seen is an FCU strain or tear is when you put too much flexion or too much force on that tendon, creating a tear. Another thing we see is ulnar nerve entrapment, also known as cubical tunnel syndrome. Moving on to the flexor carpi radialis muscle. Its origin point is located on the medial epicondyle of the humerus, and it comes down into the base of the second and third metacarpal or anterior palm surface, being its insertion point. The main actions of the flexor carpi radialis would be flexion of the wrist and abduction of the wrist. Other actions that this muscle assists in is a weak flexion of the elbow, not being one of its primary movements or actions. And another thing is pronation of the forearm, just providing a little bit of assistance, but its main actions or main things are flexion of the wrist, similar to the flexor carpi ulnaris, but different from the flexor carpi ulnaris is abduction of the wrist. So instead of coming in towards the body, you're going away of the body. Some movements or day-to-day activities that can be seen using the flexor carpi radialis muscle may include writing, typing, carrying bags, similar, but flexion of that wrist, just anything that involves bringing those wrists inward or creating some type of flexion or even abduction, like brushing your hair, keeping that thumb inwards. Some stretches for the flexor carpi radialis muscle could be having that elbow fully extended, with the forearm a little bit sublimated while just passively extending and abducting the wrist. Some examples will be a prayer stretch where you bring your hands together, trying to get the base of the palm to touch, and then bringing it in and bringing it down, getting a nice stretch or extension in the muscle. Another stretch that can be done is a tabletop stretch, having the palm of your hands facing towards your feet and then bringing your hips up to a flat or tabletop position. Some ways to strengthen this muscle can be dumbbell curls, having a pair of curls and having palms down, bringing it up and then bringing it down, or using a wrist roller, which is a tube with a rope connected, having some form of resistance at the bottom, where you have to rotate your wrist to bring it up and then bring it down. Some ways to
Oh, yeah. So for this, essentially, it's just progression and regression. We're just reiterating what we taught before. Um, for this specific case, with the exercise we provided, it's mostly weight based. So here it's pretty simple. Increase the weight. So you started off with 15 pounds, you raise it up to 20, gradually 25. Just keep building upon that. More sets, more reps. Say you want to do start off with uh 3 sets of 10. So 3 sets, 10 reps. Increase that to four by 10, 4 by 15, so on and so forth. You get the idea. Stretching as well. As you can see here, he's doing like wrist exercise like that. So you can increase the time that you hold it. You can increase the distance being stretched. So maybe you just want to pull a little harder, feel that tension rise. Um, and for regression, it's pretty much the adverse. You want to do the adverse of what's mentioned. You can also just do something like an alternative. In this case, for the weights, you can probably do bands instead of weights. It'd be a little bit easier compared to lifting weights. And then the same thing applies for stretching. So you can, instead of doing that, you maybe do table stretch, fully extend the hand with pulling the with the wrist back, as opposed to the stretches we provided so far. And so here we touch on the injuries that can happen to the flexor carpi radialis, where for one, the FCR tenosynovitis, FCR stands for flexor carpi radialis. That essentially is just the inflammation of the fluid-filled synovium, within the tendon sheath. It commonly manifests as pain, swelling, and contractures, and then the tendon rupture. It's a little self-explanatory. This is just caused by sudden forceful pull on the tendon. Maybe you were lifting something really heavy that you weren't expecting to be heavy. So as a result, it tears or ruptures. And then lastly, there's de Quervain's tenosynovitis. It's correlated with the other two in the sense that it's tenosynovitis, and then it ties into tendon ruptures, where it's a inflammation of the tendon sheath around the thumb, which can affect the FCR tendon. Well, not ruptures per se, but it's just more so tendons. It's definitely correlated to that. They all kind of go hand in hand as a trio. Now we move on to the palmaris longus muscle. So it originates on the medial epicondyle of the humerus. And for the insertion, it's located on the palmar aponeurosis of the second, third, and fourth and fifth metacarpal bones. So essentially, you can see in the diagram, it's very similar to the other muscles we've touched on so far. The origins are very high up at the humerus, goes all the way down to the metacarpals, which is essentially the um, around here, and you can just see it's a lot more hand oriented, wrist oriented compared to the other two so far. So now we're talking about the main actions of the palmaris longus. It is not necessarily an initiator, it's more so of a supporter in the sense that it's an accessory to the other two muscles and it aids in stuff more so than initiates stuff. So with flexion of the wrist, it acts as an accessory flexor through assisting in the bending of the wrist. Um, Again, it's a supporting role. And then extension of the elbow also contributes to elbow stability, particularly when the elbow is fully extended. The way it does this is more so through indirect means by helping to control supination and pronation of the forearm, which helps to stabilize the extension of the elbow. Palmaris longus muscle daily use. Again, it doesn't necessarily initiate in things, but it aids in things. So these daily functions are more so from the other two muscles, but it just helps in supporting these daily uses essentially. Especially in the cases of like squeezing and gripping objects. It's very hand oriented, as we've mentioned. So that would be a very obvious one of just squeezing your hand, grabbing a cup, uh, so on and so forth. So palmaris longus muscle stretches. Um, so here again, you can see it very much is dependent on the other muscles and the what it's capable of. So for example, the woman down below is doing a wrist flexor stretch, and pretty straightforward. She's doing it in a way that's the palm, well, the hand is facing upward rather than downward. But you can do it either way. You can also do the PNF wrist flexor stretch, which is similar, just slightly varied in the sense that one is like a full extension of the arm, whereas one is like a slight just bending of the arm. And then there's also assisted wrist rotations where this one, it's not shown. It's essentially just doing this. You can just move your hands around like that, and it's just a good exercise for that one. It's a little bit more unique to this muscle compared to the other two so far. And now we have the muscle exercises. As it says, you can incorporate exercise like wrist flexion, extension, finger curls, along with stretches. Pretty basic exercises. You get the grip trainer on the left, pretty basic. Just grab something. It's just squeeze as hard as you can. You do that over time, build strength in your hands and your arms. And then there's wrist flexion with the resistance band. Pretty straightforward. You're squeezing something and you're pulling it really hard as you can. And both of these are great for the palmaris longus. And palmaris longus muscle progression and regression, essentially, just what we talked about before. Progression, you build upon what you already are doing, increase reps, increase sets. You make it more difficult. Maybe you can even do alternative exercises that could be more challenging for you. And then for stretching, same concept. So if you're doing like a wrist flexor stretch, do that longer, push it further, feel the tension rise. It's more challenging. Same thing for this. Do it longer, maybe try and go more in depth, stuff like that, essentially. Regression, again, the adverse. Do less, do less. Find alternatives, make it easier. And then on the bottom right, you can see resistance bands, for example, that would tie into the progression, where you can do bigger ones that are harder to pull, so it makes it more challenging. It's more difficult. Um, but yeah, that's those are some good examples of progression and regression. And now, lastly, for the possible injuries, um, these are pretty straightforward as well. So muscle strains, we kind of touched on this a little bit. It's just repetition, overuse, or sudden forceful movements. That's what causes strains to the palmaris longus. And it can cause pain in the forearm, the palm, the wrist, and at least difficulty just grasping stuff, which is not ideal. And then for the second one, tendon tears and ruptures, again, pretty straightforward. Um, it can cause weakness and difficulty moving the wrist and hands, maybe accompanied by swelling and bruising as well. And then lastly, nerve compression. Palmaris longus can also compress the median nerve of ulnar, median nerve or ulnar nerve, sorry, due to swelling, inflammation, etc. And yeah, so that's pretty much about it. That concludes our video project.